Let's talk about network security devices for just a moment. There's a few that I'd like to introduce you to. This won't be an exhaustive look at them, but just kind of a short description of what they are, how they work, and how they can help us secure our network. So I've got a little diagram here that kind of shows the internet connected in through a router to your typical wired network. Now I've added in several additional devices. Specifically, I've got several firewalls, I've got an IDS, my router's acting as a proxy, and I've got a couple of servers. So let's talk about firewalls first. So a firewall is a device that looks at network traffic and either decides to pass it or drop it based on a set of rules. So this firewall here, which is kind of my first stop from the internet, as traffic comes into the network or leaves the network, it stands right next to the internet. Now this firewall may be designed to block out obvious threats, stuff that is obviously not supposed to come onto my network, high risk things, IP addresses that don't make sense, etc. So that firewall may have the job of kind of protecting the network as a whole. However, you'll notice that I have a public server here connected to my router going through my firewall. That firewall does need to allow access to my public server. So it's going to have a set of rules in it that block out the obvious stuff but still pass through the expected traffic as well as public traffic over here to my public server. Now I've got another firewall on the other side of my router from my public server. So while this firewall allows public access to the server, this firewall here is going to deny public access to the rest of the systems. So these two firewalls are going to work in concert, this one kind of blocking out all the obvious stuff, the next one blocking out public access to the inside network, while this guy still has public access, or rather the public has access to it. Now inside these network devices here, this kind of represents all of my normal devices on my normal network. Now I might add one more firewall if I have a super secure server that I want to keep very well protected. This firewall, it might even prevent any sort of internet connection at all. It's going to block everything going out over here, but it may allow internal network devices to talk to that secure server. It might even have another firewall to protect that very secure server inside. Now these would be hardware firewalls, some sort of a networking device that actually has a firewall operating system running on it. Every single system, Windows systems, Mac OS X, Linux systems, actually have their own built-in software firewall as well, but it's going to be a little bit more permissive than these firewalls, and we can kind of enforce rules for the entire network with these firewalls here. Now another network device that I'd like to talk about is the intrusion detection system, this IDS here. Now as the name would imply, it's designed to detect intrusions into the network, whether those are malicious or they look like they could be harmful to the network. That's what the IDS is all about. Now we can put the IDS a variety of places, or we can even use multiple IDSs to kind of look at different parts of the network to determine if there has been an intrusion. For an example, if we're very concerned about the security of this particular secure server, we may want to have an IDS right next to it so that we can determine if anything gets into the secure server. But taking one step back, we may want to make sure that this firewall is doing its job at blocking out threats, so we may want to use this IDS to see if any threats were headed towards the server that our firewall was successful in stopping. And we may even want to put it all the way out here on the internet to determine if any attacks of any kind are actually headed towards our network. Now the problem with putting an IDS right here on the internet is it will detect a ton of noise, even though this firewall is actually stopping it. So we can put the IDS in a variety of places, and again, much like the software firewalls that our network devices have, we can also put IDSs directly on individual devices in order to detect whether incidents have happened or not and respond appropriately. Now one more thing about the IDS, the intrusion detection system, we can upgrade an IDS to an IPS, or an intrusion prevention system, by giving it access to the firewall rules. Essentially what that means is when an IDS sees a threat on the network, it will create a firewall rule to block that network traffic or that particular threat from gaining access to the network. May even isolate network devices from the rest of the network to prevent that infection from spreading. So that's the difference between an intrusion detection system and an intrusion prevention system, the IPS has access to a firewall so that it can change firewall rules and prevent intrusions, while the IDS is simply detecting them and notifying a human user. Firewalls, IDSs. Another one is proxies. So routers actually tend to work as proxy servers today using port address translation kind of transparently, but we can include proxy servers more specifically. Let's just talk about what a proxy server is. So a proxy server is a device that makes a request on behalf of another device. So let's say we've got our network devices here. We want them to be anonymous out on the internet. Well, every web page that we request, the request goes out to the internet, the web page comes back, and our information is transmitted in that, who actually requested that web page. A proxy server, however, can make that same request on our behalf and keep our anonymity up. So we can ask the proxy server to ask for the Google homepage. The proxy server then goes, asks for the Google homepage, and Google responds to the proxy server, which then passes the page along to us. So proxy servers can be useful for promoting anonymity. They can also be useful for caching information. If we have multiple devices requesting the same information, rather than going out and getting that information multiple times, we can cache that information on a proxy or store a copy of the information on the proxy server so that each request for that information comes from the local network rather than going out and getting that information off the internet. It can improve network performance. It can also help reduce the amount of external network bandwidth. One last thing that I'd like to talk about as far as network security devices is the idea of a virtual private network, or a VPN. Now you'll notice out here I've got some remote devices. These devices want to have conversations with the devices in here, but the firewalls would prevent public access, and we really don't want that traffic being observed across the internet. So how do we get these devices to talk to the network devices, maybe even the super secure server, through the internet securely? And the answer is virtual private networks. A VPN is a way of tunneling or encrypting traffic and sending it across the internet to another device. And because we know that this router has public access because of the public servers, this firewall probably has public access. We're going to use this firewall as our VPN server. So essentially what's going to happen is our remote devices are going to create an encrypted tunnel to this firewall. And that encrypted tunnel sends all of the traffic to this firewall. This firewall then decrypts it and sends it on to the rest of the network as though these devices were actually inside the network. And then as information is sent to these remote devices, rather than going through the internet unencrypted, it comes to this firewall, the firewall encrypts it and sends it back through that tunnel back to those remote devices. And so using VPNs, we can actually have these remote devices act as though they are inside this network. So all of these security devices are useful for increasing the security of a network. There are also some measures that we can take that are not security devices specifically, but things like using passwords or access control lists on our routers, or whitelists so that only certain devices get IP addresses. Each of these things will increase the security, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our network devices.